right, we will go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Tara Van Cleve. I'm a business development consultant helping Oracle developers, product managers, and developer advocates educate our users about Oracle technology. Thank you for joining us today at Autonomous Database Cloud Coaching Office Hours. We're very excited to be able to share with you use cases, database functionality, and to demo Autonomous Database. If you have any questions during the webcast, please put your questions in the Q&A area and we'll answer them live after the presentation, along with any of the pre-submitted questions. This webcast is being recorded and we will make it available shortly after the webcast concludes. Again, thank you for joining Autonomous Database Cloud Coaching Office Hours. This webcast will be presented by Casey Ross, Cloud Engineer at Oracle. At this point, I will turn it over to Casey.
Great, thanks, Tara. So as Tara mentioned, I'm a cloud engineer here at Oracle. And what that means is that I've just been here about 3 years helping customers with demos, proof of concepts, a little bit of implementation to get started with some of our services like the Autonomous Database. So to get started, first off, we're just going to show our standard safe harbor statement. And then we'll get into the agenda today. So we've just done the introductions. So next we'll start off with an Autonomous Database overview. So we'll just do a quick PowerPoint presentation over some of the features of Autonomous Database and how that can differ from a little bit of our services in the Classic. And then after that, we're actually going to go into a live environment and look at our Autonomous Database through a demo. So during this demo, we're going to go through what it takes to actually provision and create your own instance of Autonomous Database, or as you might see quite a bit, we refer to it as ADB. And so once we actually go through the provisioning steps, we're going to look at an instance that's already running, and then we're going to go through, what the console looks like, how do you manage certain aspects, and start actually creating connections to it. So once we're done with that, we're going to actually get some data from our object storage, and we're actually going to, using Autonomous Database and our SQL Developer Web, we're going to actually take that data from object storage and upload it into our Autonomous Database. Next, we'll actually walk through a little bit of machine learning, and we'll actually be using the built-in machine learning notebooks in our Autonomous Database. And then the last thing, we'll actually use a little bit of those machine learning algorithms that we made and actually create an Apex application to actually use. We created those on top of those machine learning models that we created in that notebook lab. So once we're done with that, as Tara mentioned, we'll actually walk through all the questions and answers that we received. So as we're going along and you have any questions, feel free just to use that chat window and put them in there. All right, so the first thing, we'll just give a brief background on the Autonomous Database. So what does that really mean? This isn't something that Oracle came up with overnight. We've been working on, our Exadata and our database for many years, and it's all finally kind of came together in the cloud to give us our Autonomous Database. So with our automation of our infrastructure and database, and on top of that, we've added some machine learning in the background to actually, help make this more efficient. We got our Autonomous Database Cloud. So we'll just kind of walk through a little bit of, autonomous sounds great, but what does that actually mean? So we'll start off with provisioning. It's very easy to provision a new database, and it automatically is going to set up, things like the infrastructure that runs on Exadata, the Active Data Guard standby. When we're talking about security, you don't have to worry about, doing any security updates. It's just going to do that for you, and it's not taking anything offline. That will do that all while it's online. As far as managing, all the patches, again, are going to be managed online. And we automatically do tuning and set and perform all the OS and sysdba operations. So you won't actually have access to the OS or the sysdba because all that's going to be handled for you behind the scenes. So the next thing is just the protection. So we automate the backup restore. We have, application transparent failover within cluster. And so the next thing we can talk about is scaling. So that's, a big concern for a lot of our customers is, you might have peaks during, busy seasons where all of a sudden you need a lot more CPU usage or even storage. So how does that look? So luckily with the autonomous database, you can actually scale CPU and storage separately. And so you're really getting a true pay per use based on where you're using in the autonomous database. The next thing is to optimize. So you're not worrying about, any human errors or a lot of the things like DBAs have to work on. Some of this is just automatically done for you, such as optimizing indexes, actually creating those execution plans to run more efficiently each time you run different queries. So that's a little bit about what actually makes the autonomous database autonomous. So the next thing I'll talk about is the deployment options. So there's two different options. We have our shared Exadata infrastructure. So this would be, you able to spin up a VM on a shared Exadata infrastructure very quickly. And so what that means is you're going to have other customers, running workloads next to yours. It'll all be still isolated, but if you have the need to actually, have your complete own Exadata system, then we also have dedicated Exadata infrastructure. So that would just mean you're not going to run anything on, that shared Exadata. You're going to have your complete own setup. So as far as the shared infrastructure, what really works well with this is that, again, Oracle automates and manages everything. It's really easy to get started with this because, all you have to do is have one OCPU and just 1 hour of commitment. And then so as you build things up and you can continue to scale to, increase that CPU usage or storage so that you're not, locked into, 1 month out of the year, we have to have, very high usage because, maybe it's like our busy season. And then the rest of the year, we're just, scaling back. But because of our old infrastructure, you would have to actually, keep that usage at the very top. So you'd have to plan for your maximum, where this allows it to be elastic and you can, just truly pay per use. So the next thing we'll talk about is the dedicated infrastructure. So this, again, it provides your own database cloud, and it's going to be on your own Exadata infrastructure. So that's going to be separated from, the rest of our Exadata services. So what that means, you do get a little bit more control of provisioning, updates, availability. And again, you can isolate workloads using separate, virtual machines or container databases. Then we'll talk a little bit more about the dedicated infrastructure. So what makes this nice is that all your developers are still going to have that console. So we'll still have that GUI where you can go in and actually, change different things over your Exadata system, even if you are using dedicated. And that also allows like IT to have more, insight to what's actually going on. So you'll still be able to actually go in and view resource usage and spending, and you can set up certain isolation policies to only give, the correct users access to what they need. So really, it's really good for IT and developers alike. So next, now that we looked at the two different versions of deployment, now we can look at the different workloads that you're available to use on Autonomous Database. So the first one is Autonomous Data Warehouse. So that would be, more for anything machine learning, if you actually need to make a data lake with your data. And then we also have autonomous transaction processing. So, as the name describes, transactions, you're thinking about, a lot of, inputs and outputs very constantly. So again, it's good for, application development, some IoT things, anything where you're getting like high transactions in and out of that database. Transaction processing is a good one to use. So again, it's just going to change how the database is actually optimized. So you can still do the same things with either of these, different workload types. The only difference is, as this kind of slide describes, So the data warehouse is actually going to optimize complex SQL queries. So that's good for, when you're actually doing data warehouse and things like that, but it might not be as good for transaction processing. So when we're using transaction processing, the database, if you choose that, is actually going to optimize response time over complex SQL queries. And again, you can see some of these other things, such as the data warehouse is going to be, more columnar based, where the transaction processing is going to be row format. And there's a couple other little differences as you can read, but really you can do most things with both of them. It's just more optimizing, autonomous database for whatever your individual workload need is. So another really good thing about autonomous database is that it comes with a lot of out-of-the-box tools for developers. So we have a SQL Developer Web that's just automatically built in and included, where it does a lot of the things you can think of using your normal SQL developer, but instead of actually having to make that connection, you can log in right inside the console. The next thing we have is Apex, so that would be our application express. And again, that's just a way you can get in there and right on top of the database, create, simple applications to, manage your data. So maybe you're just wanting to expose a couple, tables in the database. You can just quickly and easily build an application on top of Apex to allow that without, having a ton of coding experience. The next, we also have Oracle REST data services. So this would be just the ability to expose your data, externally with the REST endpoint. So instead of having to go out there and in any development environment, maybe like having a separate like Python or Java application to expose some of these REST endpoints, you can actually do that straight from inside of Autonomous Database. So as we talked about scaling, this is a good representation of how it really benefits to have the true pay per use with scaling. So as this shows, most of the time, if depending on what you're running, you're going to always have to pay for the max potential CPU usage. So even though you're not using it all the time, you have to plan around that, because if it does hit that threshold, you're going to want to make sure to actually have that CPU usage. So the nice thing about Autonomous Database is that you're not worried about hitting that max potential, because we can automatically scale up when needed, and you're only paying for what you really need. So again, the benefits, just to kind of summarize what we went over, you have a reduced administration cost. The runtime cost is not going to be as much because of self-tuning and different things that you don't have to worry about anymore. Because a lot of the security configurations and online updates are there, that's another thing you're not worried about. So that definitely makes a reduced risk. And then, like, as far as some of the developer tools that are just built in, it really just allows more innovation. And now that your DBAs might not be focused as much on, applying security patches and that sort of thing, they can really switch their focus to more things like, maybe actually starting to see how you can use machine learning inside of your company, or making a new application that you thought would take a lot more time that you've been needing for a while. All right, so that's everything with the slides. So the next part, we're actually just going to go straight into the demonstration. So you can see I just logged into my cloud account. So this would be the very first screen that you see when you log in. So you can see that we have a lot of different quick actions as far as, if you want to create a compute instance, if you want to set up networking. And over here, you can see that we have our autonomous transaction processing and data warehouse as well. So these are just good, quick actions. And then we also have some good, tutorials down here as well. So maybe if you wanted to actually get a quick introduction to Application Express, we have blogs and other resources down here available as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually go up right next to Oracle Cloud and click on this hamburger menu. So what this is going to do is just open up a console that has all of our different applications available. So you can see that it's broken out into different categories. So we have our core infrastructure. So that's just going to be anything compute, networking, storage. And then the next section is actually going to be our Oracle database. So you can see we have our autonomous data warehouse, autonomous JSON database, and then autonomous transaction processing, as well as all of our DB system. So if you're not wanting to go to the autonomous route, you still have that option to actually go in here and create a database system where you would still have access to some of those sysdba or OS level things that you might need. So again, you can kind of keep going down here and you can see all of our different services. But for this, we're actually just going to go straight into autonomous data warehouse. So I'm just going to click on here. So you'll see I already have a couple sample databases running. But as soon as you actually log in, obviously you're not going to have any running. So the first thing I'm going to show is how to actually provision this database. So you'll see this create autonomous database button up here. So that's what I'll just go ahead and click on. And you can see how easy it is to create a new database. So the first thing you're actually going to want to do is just choose what compartment it's actually in. So compartments in our cloud are just logical containers. So it doesn't actually have anything to do with what what you can provision depending on policies, but it would just allow you to keep all your resources together. So you can see that I have my own compartment in here where I can select all my resources and just keep those together. So the first thing, you'll just give it a display name. So we could just call it test database, and this is the name that's just going to show up on the console. Next, you can see that we have our actual database name that we're going to give it. So I'll just leave it as this. And then the next part, you're actually going to choose a workload type. So as I mentioned before, the main two are data warehouse for transaction processing, but we also do have the JSON. So if you're only going to need, JSON-centric applications, you can also choose that as well. And then we also have an option just for Apex. So Apex is included with our data warehouse and transaction processing, but if you only needed to use that, you could actually just, if that was your main workload for creating this autonomous database, you could choose that as well. So the next part we're going to look at is just our deployment type. So you can see that we've actually, talked about each of these. So mainly you're actually going to probably be using shared infrastructure if you're especially learning or just spinning up an instance for, just test. But if you do have more of a production workload that you're wanting to run and that you have a good use case for dedicated infrastructure, you can just click on this as well. So the next section is just around configuring the database. So you can see we do have an always free option. So if you actually click that, you can see we've already reached our max in this tenancy, but you'll be able to actually spin up an always free database. So you can see that you're required to, you can't scale this. So it's just going to be at 1 OCPU, and you're only going to get 20 gigabytes of storage. But it's another great way where you continually have this as long as you have the account, free database running. And it's a good way to go in and for educational purposes or to do any testing. But otherwise, you can go in here and actually scale your CPU usage that you'd want and storage. And you can see that you can scale them independently of each other. And then we're also going to have our database version that you can choose. So right now we have 19C available, so we'll just choose that. And then we also have our auto scaling option. So auto scaling, you could choose whether or not you want to enable it. So what this will do, it's just if it is enabled, it'll allow it to go up to 3 times the number of compute power that you give it. So for example, if you have it at just at 2 OCPUs, it could go up to 6 OCPUs with auto scaling enabled. So the next part would actually be for the database. So the database user that's going to get created is just the admin user. And then you're just going to put in a password here. So this could be any password that you want for your database user. And then once that's done, the last thing that you can choose is your network access. So you can choose to just put it in an Oracle, handled virtual cloud network where you're still going to allow secure access from anywhere based on having to have the correct credentials, but it's not going to be in a cloud network that you can control. Or if you already have provisioned a virtual cloud network, maybe you have a private subnet that you need this database to run in. You have that option as well, and you can click this, and then it's actually going to give you options for virtual cloud networks within your tenancy that you could actually put this inside of. So for this example, we can just leave it as allow secure access from everywhere. And then we would go down here and just hit create after this. And it only takes a couple minutes to start this up. But for this example, I'm just going to hit cancel because I already have a database running. So it'll say provisioning right when you start it up, but then just give it a minute and it will change to available. And once it changes to available, you can just click on the display name. So we're just going to go into this demo ADB instance, and it'll take you to the console for Autonomous Database. So for this instance, as soon as you click into it, you can see a lot of different details around what's actually been provisioned. So you can see that we get our database name. We're going to see how many CPUs we have, as well as storage, and a lot of other features like the database version. But the initial thing that you'd want to do is actually understand how to connect to this database. So we have this button up here that says DB connection that you can click. And this will actually allow us to download an instant wallet. So what the instance wallet has is all the different credentials that we would need as far as connection strings and anything like that to actually connect to this database from whatever application or even your normal SQL developer. So I'll just close out of this. And then so the next thing you can see towards the end is scale up and down. So even though we have already, set our CPU usage and then our storage, and maybe we even have auto scaling enabled, but if you wanted to still come up here and just hit scale up and down, you're available to go here and just manually scale your instances as well. And then also if you didn't select auto scaling, you can go in here and select that as well. So the next thing we'll look at is if I scroll down, you can see that on this page, we also have a lot of different metrics and charts that you can see about your Autonomous Database. So you can see, how our CPU utilization went. So you can see that earlier this morning when I was running some scripts for this demo, you can see that we were getting a little higher in our one core. So our one core got up to 60%, which is fine. But if you were watching this and it was getting higher and you had auto scaling enabled, you'd actually see this jump up from 1 CPU to 2 because of this CPU utilization. So the same thing for storage over here. You can see that utilization as well as active sessions, running statements, and some other metrics. So the other thing is it does have backups. So they will be automatically initiated with auto backup, but you can also come in here and create a manual backup if you have a particular point in time. Otherwise, they would just be created daily. So the next thing I'll go to is actually the service console. And this is just going to give us some more charts and an overview of how much storage we've actually used. Again, we can go to activity and we can still get more insight around what's actually going on in real time, or we can look at a certain time period. The next thing we have is just our administration. So again, we'll be able to download that wallet file that I talked about earlier. We can set the administrator password here as well, just in case you need to update that. And then we can also add any new machine learning users here as well. So we'll get back to that in a second. But for the next step, I'm going to go over here to development. And you'll see that we have, all the different services that I talked about earlier as far as Oracle Machine Learning Notebooks. We have our SQL Developer Web. And then we also have, Oracle Apex. So if you want to make an application, and then our REST services as well. So for this example, we're actually just going to go into SQL Developer Web. So I'm just going to click that. And it'll ask you for your username. So for this example, I'm just going to sign in as my admin user. I'll just put in my password. And you'll see that it'll take us to a console that gives us a bunch of different database actions. So you can see that we have SQL, which would be our SQL Developer Web, which we'll go into in a minute. We also have a data modeler, something to manage JSON documents, our REST endpoints that I talked about, and then our Apex for application building. And then we have some other tools. So if you actually just want to load some data directly using this, you can click data load. And then we have a couple different options as far as if you want to load it from a database, cloud storage, or actually, just feed the data into the Autonomous database. So I'm going to go back to database actions. And you'll see we also have, some data modeling and data insights things as well. So the first thing we'll do is just click SQL to open up our SQL Developer Web. And you'll see that it's taken us into the admin schema, and then it'll show us all the different tables that we have here. So you can see I have a lot of tables from just copying data, so log files. But down here, you can see that I have a couple more tables. But what we're going to start with is actually uploading some data from object storage. So the first thing we'll actually need to do to start that is I'm just going to go to the script file for create tables. And what this is going to do is just create all these different tables. And once we actually get these created, we're going to go into object storage and populate these tables with files from object storage. So you can see that we have our sales table, costs, a couple other ones as far as products, promotions, customers. So what we're just going to do is go to the very top, and we're just going to hit this button to run this entire script. And so you can see it just takes a second, and now we have all these different tables created. So the next thing we're going to want to do is actually upload information into these tables. So I'm just going to go to the script called table upload. And the way this is done is since our database actually doesn't have access to what's going on in our cloud, we have to go ahead and create a credentials to grant that permissions. So it would just be like using like the API in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. We're just going to go ahead and create a credential based on our user. And then we're going to give it this password, which I'll show you where to get in just a moment. So once we actually create that credential, we'll go down here and we're going to actually give it the link to our object storage. And then as soon as we give it this base link, we're just going to tell it to go look for this file and copy it into this table. And then you can see that we have a couple different options for formatting based on what file you're actually uploading. So the first thing to do here would be to actually create this credential. So I already have mine created, but I'll show you really quick where to go to do that. So if I go back to my main home screen in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, if you look at the very right-hand side, you'll see a profile. And then the very first thing is your user. So I can just click on that. And it's going to take me to a page with all the information about my user. So what we would like here is actually to go down to auth tokens. And you can see I already have one generated, but what you can do is just generate this token, and you can just give it a description here. And once you, which I guess I already have both tokens, but so once you do that, it'll show you a token that you can only see once, and you have to actually copy and paste that back into our SQL developer for this password. And then you can just give it whatever username you're actually logged into, and that will give Oracle Autonomous Database, our database here, access to our object storage. So the next thing to do is we can go back to our console, and right now we're in users, but let's go over to object storage really quickly. So I'll just scroll down to our core infrastructure, object storage. And then you'll see that I have this demo bucket set up. So this is where I just went ahead and uploaded all these different flat files. So you can see we have some just standard data files, some CSV files, to object storage. So they're just sitting in this object storage bucket. And this is where we're going to actually tell our database to go in this bucket, look for these files, and then upload them to those tables that we just created. So to do that, the first thing we'll actually do, I'm just going to go ahead and run this entire script. So the first thing that we'll do is actually create this credential for our database to access object storage. And then the next thing we're going to go do is just find this URL. So this URL for object storage can be found if I go back here. And if I just look at any of these different files, there's a little menu on the very far side on the right hand where you can go to view object details. And based on that, it'll show you the URL path to your object storage. So we would only need up to bucket right here. And that's what I copy and pasted to actually create this base URL. And then once we did that, we're just giving it the name of the table again, telling it what credential to use so it can access object storage, and then passing in that URL with that file attached to it. So once we did that for all these different tables, which you can see, you can even, if your delimiter's maybe not a comma, which maybe it's this pipe character, you can just specify that as well, depending on what your data is. So once we're done with creating all these tables, we actually just copied the data over for most of these tables, but this very last table, you can see that instead of doing this copy data, we're actually creating an external table. So what that means is that we're still going to use the same file from object storage, but instead of actually uploading it into our database and taking up storage, we can actually leave that file in our object storage and then just query it still, just like we would any other table in Autonomous Database. So we can see down here all these procedures are now successfully completed. So we're actually going to now look at a little sample of the data. So I'm just going to go to Query Tables. And so what this does, right now we're just comparing that table that we uploaded the data from object storage versus the table where we left it in object storage and just are querying it with the data still sitting in object storage. So you can see on both of these, we got the same results of the first 5 rows. So, but what you'll notice a difference in elapsed time. So you can see that, if it's actually sitting in our Autonomous Database, that it gets, created very quickly. And then if you look at the one for object storage, it takes more like half of a second instead of as quick as the very first one. That's just because instead of actually having that data uploaded inside of ADB, it's just going out to object storage and querying the data that way. So other than that, you would have, most of your functionality to come in here and run scripts that you have in SQL Developer. But the next step we're actually going to look at is our machine learning notebooks built on top of Autonomous Database. So I can go back to our menu here where we access SQL Developer Web, and I can just click on Oracle Machine Learning Notebooks. So here I'm actually not going to log in with the admin user. I'm just going to go ahead and log in as my ML user and then hit sign in. So this will just bring us to a home screen where we have some examples, and then you'll see that we have jobs, scratch pads. But for this example, we just actually want to look at a notebook that we have. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Notebooks. And then the first one we'll look at is just this ML credit demo. So these are all of the notebooks that we currently have and that we've created. You can go up here to create a new notebook. And so these are based on Zeppelin notebooks. And then you can also import any existing notebooks if you wanted to. So I'll just click into this ML credit demo. And it might take just a second for this to start up. So usually the first time you start this up, it might take a little bit longer than normal, but it looks like it's coming up now. So this is just a quick example of what these notebooks really look like. So you can see up here, right now we are actually hiding the editor, but I can show it. So if you actually just want to put different sections, so this is just specifying that we want it to be markdown instead of any kind of SQL statement. So you can see that once we run this, it's just going to bring us to a paragraph down here below for maybe, to give us more context to what we're doing. So you can see right here, we're actually trying to find what customers would have good credit based on our machine learning. So our next section, we're just actually selecting some data from the table. So you can see that all we're doing is doing a select all from our table and just grabbing the first 100 rows. And the nice thing about this is you can see over here where we have our options. So right now we're just viewing the data at the table, but we can also go in here and we have different things for bar charts, pie charts, area charts. which I'll show down here. So if I show this editor, again, we're just doing some select statements from our table and just grabbing the first 1,000 rows. And instead of actually just displaying it as a table, like so, you can see that we've actually decided to use a bar chart. So, and then you can actually go into settings here, and instead of just being, stuck with whatever bar chart it shows, you can see that we can drag and drop certain things around. So you can see that we're just looking at the number of people in each different occupation, but we could change this to, tenure, for example, and it would show us how many years people have worked at a certain area. So I'll just go ahead and change it back to occupation for now. And all these notebooks are very collaborative as well. So you can go in here, and as far as once you actually run these statements, you can share it, and then you can have someone hit this little run button up here, and it's going to go ahead and run that statement again. Or there's also a run button at the very top to run all paragraphs. And you can just hit that button, and what it's going to do is this notebook's just going to go through and run all these different paragraphs. So that's just the basics of what these machine learning notebooks look like. So the next thing I'm actually going to get into is what it looks like, a quick example of what it looks like to actually create an algorithm. And so what we'll be looking for, we'll be using the same data set here, but we're going to try to predict whether or not a customer is going to have good credit. So I can just hit this hamburger menu, go back to notebooks, and then I'm just going to click on this targeting customers that complete all payments notebook. And so I won't go ahead and run this notebook. I did a little bit earlier today, which is why you saw a little bit of a spike in the CPU usage earlier this morning. But so pretty much what happens here is once you actually create this notebook, you can hit this apply all, and it's going to go through and run all the different things in this notebook. So since I've already ran it all, we'll just kind of scroll through and just kind of show you what's available. So you can see that here, what we're really trying to do is predict whether or not a customer is going to have good credit. So let me scroll down. So this would be an example of what's actually in our data set. So you can see that based on each customer's ID, we have things like their age, income, marital status, housing type, loan length, that sort of thing that we're going to actually try to use to predict how good their credit is. So you can see right here, this is what we're actually looking at to see customers who have made all their payments on time, which you can see based on the customers who haven't is actually very hard to find. So again, you can see how we can, use these notebooks to actually create charts and visualize data, right inside of this. So we'll just kind of keep scrolling through, and some more charts to just view our data. And then the next thing we're actually going to get into is actually building some models. So the first thing to do would just to be identify the factors, most associated with having a good credit. So that's what we're actually looking at here. And this is going to display, our top attributes for good credit customers. So you can see that wealth obviously would make, sense that would be in here. And then things like credit card limit, residential status are all things that have appeared to be on the top of our list based on actually, once we actually ran this to see what actually correlates with each other. So just to kind of keep this moving, you can go through and see that we're actually training a model here to predict it. So we're actually, doing a 40-60 split based on, 60% for actually training the model, and then we're saving 40% to do our testing. And then we're going to go through, and you can see that we're building out different models. So we actually want to compare to see which one's the best. So we started out with the decision tree, and then we actually went to a support vector model, and then a random forest. And here's where we can actually go to compare the models to see which one's actually doing the best. And based on this, we might actually want to, see which one's doing the best, and that's the one we actually might want to move into production once we actually compare the models. So now that we actually have that model created, how do we actually apply it? So here you can see we're just going to add it to our base customer table, and we're just going to go ahead and actually add the probability for their credit score and whether or not we think they're going to have good credit or not. So if I scroll down, you can see that we're creating this new predictions table. And then this is where, which this is ordered by descending. So you can see that we have all of our people that have good credit at the top. So the probability that they have good credit is what we actually predicted based on some of these different column features that we have, such as occupation and loan type. So now that we actually have this model to created, that's great, but how do we actually want to make use of it? So the other nice thing about Oracle Autonomous Database is that we actually have a application builder built right in. So I'm actually going to go back to my menu here, and we're just going to hit on Oracle Apex. So I'm going to log into my ML credit app as my ML user. So this would be where we'd actually go to build out this application. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just click on App Builder. And then you'll see that this is where you can actually go to create brand new applications, import existing ones. We also have this app gallery where you can go and get good ideas for applications or maybe even good starting points. But for this demo, we're just going to jump into this Alpha Office application. And so you can see here that we have a bunch of different options as far as you can see all your different pages that are available in this application. But for right now, I'm just going to hit Run Application. And our home screen is just blank for right now, but if we go to actually Customer Walk-in, you can see that here we can actually search for different customers. So for example, I'll just go to this Cameron, and then it'll, for the last name, and then we'll actually just go to Sophia. And it's going to give us all the information there, and then as well as our credit prediction. So we could actually expose this to, maybe our internal staff that we actually want them to go ahead and see, and they're actually getting value out of our machine learning model that we created because they can come in here and see if someone's coming in for a loan, whether or not our actually model has predicted that they have good credit or not, and that might be determining whether or not we actually want to give them a loan. So we have a couple other things on this application. So you can upload customers here as well, and as soon as they're uploaded, they'll actually go through that same machine learning algorithm, and it'll actually, bring it up, run them through there so we know what percent likely are they to have good credit. So you can see some people are only, almost 1% versus 100 or 50%. So that, again, just gives us good insight. And this was all, very quickly to build. And then the last thing we can look at is just this customer upload summary. So it'll give us, the breakdowns based on how many people are in each category. So that's just a quick way to show how you can go from, uploading data into Autonomous Database to actually, using that data to create a machine learning algorithm, and then to actually, getting use out of that algorithm by actually exposing it in this website. So just to give you a quick example what it looks like to actually create an application in here, we'll just go to this Review Uploaded Customers. And as you can see, I'm in development mode right here. So I'm just going to hit this Edit Page 2. And that's just going to take us to this Page Designer. So this is where you would actually go to build out anything that you'd want to create. So as you can see at the very bottom, this is where we have all of our different available regions that we could just drag in. So for example, here we're using an interactive report to show our customer uploads. So all you'd have to do is just drag this in here and just place it wherever you'd like it. And then that will actually create an interactive report. So you can see we have a bunch of different options. And then we also have, some items. Maybe you just want a text editor or a checkbox, and then buttons. So like if you need to navigate or submit something, we have buttons that you can use as well. But then, so for example, if I just click on this customer upload, just to show you how easy it is to create this, all you would have to do is go over here on the right-hand side, and you'll see customer uploads is the title that we give it. And then we chose this interactive report just from dragging and dropping that into our canvas here. And then the next thing we're actually just going to have to do is choose where we want this data to come from to populate this. So we're just choosing our local database. So that would be our Autonomous Database instance. And we're just going to select that table. And then we'll just select if we want a table or not, or a view. And then we're actually going to select that upload tables, and then it's going to automatically populate all these different columns. So then over here, we can choose whether or not we want to include that in that chart. So after this, you can see, how quickly you can start using Autonomous Database to get usage out of, your data, and maybe even expand on some use cases that you didn't think you might have time for with how quickly you can develop in here. So I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint really quick. And so that was the demo. And then the next thing we're just going to look at is that always free. Just wanted to mention this, that in any account, you actually get 2 databases of Autonomous, and that includes 1 OCPU and 20 gigabytes. And that's going to be always free for as long as you have that account. And the same thing here, you can see we have some always free options for compute, storage, and networking. And up here, we actually have a link to a trial account that you can sign up for right now. And typically, these trial accounts usually have $300 in credit. But if you use this link by the 11th of this month, you actually get $500 instead of $300. So, and I believe that should be in the chat as well, if you just want to click that link. And then so, oops, sorry about that. And then so the next thing I want to talk about is just these cloud coaching clinics. So we just, what are cloud coaching clinics, first of all? So these are just solution engineers or cloud engineers like myself that are ready to just kind of help you out in your development journey. So what we can do here is we can actually come in with workshops that are more specified to any of your use cases, provide some sample code, we can give some demos, or we could even just work with you to ideate in the cloud. So we can help you, come up with options and what would actually, be best for your use case. And then the last thing, we do have another session coming up. So on April 12th at 10 a.m. Pacific, we're actually going to go over Oracle Container Engine for Kubernetes. And so you can see that we also have this link down here. And again, this free trial where if you sign up by the 11th, you'll get $500 instead of $300. So thanks everyone for joining. But we really appreciate it, everyone joining us today. And we hope you take, benefit of that free trial and that $500 credit to start getting hands-on with, our Oracle Cloud and Autonomous Database.
Thank you everyone so much for spending your time here with us today, and hopefully we see you guys next time. Thanks again and have a great day.
Yeah, thanks everyone.